The federal government is embarking on Canada's most radical tax overhaul in 50 years. It's starting with some proposed changes relevant to small businesses. Now, while government has maintained these are tax loopholes used by high-income individuals, critics argue that it's actually small businesses that stand to be impacted most. Iain Black, president and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, joins me now to discuss this issue further. Thanks for being here, Iain.
Thanks for having me here, and good day to you and your listeners.
Good to have you on. Now, this, of course, has been an issue that's been gaining momentum since July. What are you hearing from members?
We've never seen anything like this. You have to remember that the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade has been around for 130 years. We're not the type of organization that lights our hair on fire when one minor policy change or another happens to take place. We have an excellent relationship by virtue of being nonpartisan by our very bylaws with every level of government, every political stripe. And yet we have never seen an uprising of concern from our members the way we have this time. And you have to bear in mind that through our membership, we represent about a third of the working people of British Columbia, with 83% of our membership being small business. So we have a very, very close connection to the changes that have been proposed by the federal government. And in the eyes of our members, they've clearly missed the mark and have gone far beyond, I think, what originally the federal government was trying to do, which was to try to perhaps close some loopholes for people who were taking advantage of existing rules. And the result of which is a very, very troubling scenario for our members.
So what is troubling small businesses? What exactly is it about these proposed changes that have them concerned?
Well, what's getting a lot of media attention are a lot of the kind of the technical elements to it. There are things like tax increases, the ability to share income within a family, et cetera, et cetera. And those are certainly legitimate conversations. But what is really catching people's attention is this is almost a philosophical shift as to what it means to be a small business person, what it means to take that very real risk and walk away from a good job to put you and or your spouse's income on the line, maybe your mortgage, invest everything you own and take a risk to start a business, create employment, generate tax income from the taxes on your employees through income taxes, through PST that you GST that you collect and pay, and this economic activity that is so important to British Columbia, that seems to have been redefined in these series of changes that have been proposed to really undermine that. And my fear is dissuade men and women from taking those risks and actually driving our economy.
One of the criticisms has been that it'll stifle entrepreneurship. Do you think that would be the case?
Absolutely. And you have to remember that in British Columbia, we have a very special relationship with our small business community. 6 out of 10 jobs in BC come from the small business sector. Over a third of our GDP, our economic total output, comes via our small business community. In both cases, that's the highest of any Canadian province. So for BC in particular, this is a very big deal.
It sounds like there's a lot to lose, potentially.
Well, you know what, there is, because when you look at the incentives that are required, these are 40, 50-year-old rules that are about to be changed if the government proceeds here, and they really are there to reflect the risks that small business people take, the ability to manage money through the lean years so that you don't have to go into bankruptcy, so that you don't have to lay people off. Those are the same rules that allows you, when you hit that magic point where you're actually profitable as a small business, and not very many of them reach that point. Let's remember that you then have the ability to use some of these tax rules to actually pay your family for the sacrifices that they have made along the way with you, and directly or indirect investments by the spouse so that the one or the other can spend 14, 15 hours a day running the small business. These are very meaningful rules that have been in place a long time to reflect the risk and reward formula that is inherent in being an entrepreneur and taking those risks that are available for any Canadian to take. But those who do are entitled to some of those more relaxed rules when they reach that point, and they typically only maintain that for a short period of time in terms of being able to take advantage of some of the tax loopholes.
So to your point about how this could redefine what it means to be a small business if the proposed rules go forward, what do you think it'll mean to be a small business? Will it mean that you have to take on more risk? Will it mean that it's more costly? What's the bottom line? Well,
it means that the upside associated with getting into business for yourself has changed dramatically, and it has dropped. But there's another one too. There's two key things here. One is that these proposed changes involve an enormous administrative burden, regulation, if you will, on small businesses. Well, small businesses, by their very definition, don't have administrative staffs just to take care of extra paperwork that the government has decided they want to impose on them. So it's the husband or wife sitting at the kitchen table after the kids have gone to bed and actually sitting there for 2 or 3 hours filling out forms that does not drive more revenue for their business. It does not make their customers more satisfied as a result of what they're doing. They're not growing their employees in any way, shape, or form. All they're doing is paperwork for the benefit of the government. And they just don't have the cycles to do that kind of work. Now, these changes would increase that. But what is concerning us even more is the way that the government has proposed that they will start deciding what is an appropriate income to pay your spouse if you're trying to share income within the family, and that the government will decide whether money that's left in the business in one of those great years where you actually manage to pay all your bills and have a little bit of money left over, the government will take it upon themselves to determine whether that income left in the business should be considered profit and taxed at a higher rate, or capital gains, or dividends, or all the different types of income which has higher rates associated with it, and that you as the business owner no longer get to actually take money in and out of your business and make those decisions yourselves. The government will start doing that for you. So that is a huge change philosophically, and again, is a huge disincentive for people who are already in small business, never mind those who would like to ponder it at some point.
I think it's unclear at this stage how exactly these proposed rules might be affected, but for small businesses who have already built their business around having access to some of these tools, what do you think it means for them?
I think they're very offended. To be honest, if you spent the 5, 10, 15, 20 years, if you managed to get through those very, very difficult years, over 50% of all small businesses go bankrupt in the first 5 years. And of those that remain, 50% go bankrupt in the second 5 years. Mm-hmm. So there's enormous challenges associated with taking those risks and trying to build a better life for your family. So if they've been on that journey and they've actually reached the point, or they're getting close to that point where they're actually running a successful business, to then have the rules changed on them with a 75-day consultation period, which the last time changes like this were contemplated, the consultation period was 2 years.
Right.
So they're not getting a chance to say much. And it's not going down well because they're offended at the suggestion, but they also don't like being painted as tax cheaters. And I think that's something that the narrative is built up in certain corners, that if you happen to be a small business person, you're somehow gaming the system. And they speak of this thing called income sprinkling, if you will, mm-hmm. Which is basically where a small business owner is taking a salary out of the business. He can also take a salary out for his or her spouse, and in the process have a slightly lower tax rate for that money coming out of the business. This is exactly what exists today for federal government employees who are on a federal government pension. They can do exactly the same thing. And there are many, many examples of others who can do this. So to categorize small business owners who are taking this risk, creating jobs, driving our economy in such a meaningful way, to categorize and characterize those people in that activity as somehow cheating or cheaters, while the exact same thing is happening with, in a very specific example, federal government pensioners, and they're not being called tax cheaters at all. They're just taking advantage of existing rules that are apparently legitimate. That's not okay, and it's totally unfair, and our members are reacting very negatively as a result.
So to that point, do you think anything about these proposed changes does anything to move the legislation toward putting everyone on a more even playing field?
Well, I think if the government is wanting to stand back and thoughtfully look at how we pay tax in this country at a personal level, at a business level, and distinguish between small business and large corporation, those are really important, meaningful, and legitimate conversations to have. But that's not what this is. This, in my view, was an attempt to pursue a very specific objective where there's this perception, and doctors appear to be the poster child on this one at the moment, where doctors have incorporated, and I might add, they were encouraged to do so 30 years ago by the federal government, mm-hmm. For legal liability reasons. That somehow chasing doctors or dentists or lawyers who have incorporated as small businesses for legitimate legal protection reasons, if nothing else, and vilify them and say that, pursue them and say they're not paying their fair share. It seems to us that this was the intent of some of these changes, to go after very specific individuals. Well, the result of this is that the burden of running a small business has massively increased on everybody for what appears to be a very small benefit of increased taxes from a very few. And that's why we're struggling with this.
I'm speaking to Iain Black. He's the president and CEO at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. You're doing quite a bit of advocacy to this point. A lot of people have come out. They've lobbied their MPs. They're speaking out to media. Do you think government's listening?
Well, so far, no. It's been very difficult to get government's attention on this, and I think we have to remember that we're dealing with the federal government, who has had a very good honeymoon period. It's been our prime minister has represented our country enormously well globally at a time when we desperately need globally some responsible and moral leadership. And I think he's represented our country as an ambassador enormously well in that regard. And that has perpetuated the honeymoon period of the overall administration. This is one of the first challenges they've had where they got it wrong. And they're now being tested as to how they respond when they realize they've got it wrong. And so I think they're starting to get that message, because it was originally being dismissed, to be honest. It was that this is no big deal. And let us explain to you why you were wrong. And you can imagine how well that goes down with our members who are, working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. And they're just being told by government that, no, they're wrong. They don't understand their own business and their own environment and what these changes might mean for them. So that is one of the reasons why we've seen such an increase in our own advocacy efforts, because we've never seen anything like what we're seeing at the moment. We invited our members to participate through sending an email through our website. And before coming on air with you today, I checked the count, and we're just shy of 11,000 emails that have been sent to British Columbia members of Parliament since we opened that up on Thursday of last week. And we're still tracking to 1,000 a day that is just yesterday. Mm-hmm. So we're tracking at a very high level. This is not going away. This is getting bigger as small businesses slow down enough after they finish working their 14-hour day. They get a chance to digest some of what they're picking up in the media, give a quick call to their accountants or their bookkeepers, and start to and their financial planners, and ask questions about, what does this mean for my retirement planning and my ability to actually take money out of my business when I'm ready and hopefully sell my business one day because I don't have a pension. Mm. And they're not liking the answers. So therefore, they're starting to get more involved, and they're using us and their membership in us to exercise those views.
What would you, the board, and your members like to see happen next?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, if tax reform is on the agenda of the government, that is a totally legitimate, thoughtful conversation. That should happen in every government from time to time. Are we actually collecting money in a fair way? The word fair is a very powerful word, and this government loves using it. But fair to you might not mean fair to your friend or to me. So fair is a wonderfully subjective word as well. So if the government wants to go down that path, we would be delighted to entertain the conversation with them, engage them through the massive employee base and GDP base that our organization represents. But first and foremost, we want them to pause. Our little hashtag is, pause, hit the pause button, right? If you will, hashtag hit the pause button. And we want them to stop and reflect on what they've put out there, reflect on the massive uprising they're seeing across Canada as to these proposed changes, and make sure that they're comfortable with the fact that when they pull on that little string, there's not one or two little bells that ring, there's about 30. And they may not be what they expected, and hopefully reflect on that and engage us as to how they can perhaps chart a different path going forward. But first and foremost, hit the pause button.
Iain, great having you on the program. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the opportunity.
That's Iain Black, President and CEO at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade.